this computer. Okay, so hello everybody, welcome to the new decade and to the new year. This is our first SIG API Machinery meeting of 2020. We skipped a couple of meetings because of December and the holidays, a bunch of them. So glad to be back here with all of you. So let's go to our business. I think, Mr. Bobby Tables, you are the first one. You want to give us some updates on 118?
Yep, I figured just get this out of the way and then let you do your meeting. I'm Bob, or Mr. Bobby Tables Online. I'm one of the release lead shadows, and we're trying to just hit every SIG and just make sure they know about the various states. The big one that's coming up that's just a little under 2 weeks away is enhancements freeze. Honestly, I'm not too worried about API machinery. Y'all have been pretty good about keeping track of these dates, but still want to just make sure folks know it. The other big one is, of course, code freeze. That's later in March.
Okay.
That's pretty much it. So
we have, what is that, 7 weeks from now, 8 weeks, 7?
Yeah, I think 7.
Okay, for code freeze. Thank you. Any question on the dates or 118? Not for now.
If you do have any questions, feel free to just ping me or ping any of the other leads in Slack.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, next item. This is kind of old already, but it's been here when we canceled. So glad to have connected with many of you at KubeCon in San Diego. Was at least for me very impacting to see such a large KubeCon, the largest ever I have been, and it has been. I think it was around 12,000 people. For me, the contrast was contributor day on Monday. You more or less know the faces, and then the next day you couldn't even get into the restroom because so many people around. So it's impressive. So I put there a couple of links on related talks. There was an intro to SIG API Machinery. I heard it's not very good. Was given by me, and
it was fine.
And then there was a deep dive. I think the deep dive, especially for the people on this meeting, is very interesting. We spoke about a bunch of things.
Yeah, the deep dive was cool. We did it was basically 3 lightning talks on 3 different things, which I think might be a good model to follow in the future for.
We did
server-side apply, priority and fairness, and what was the third one? I don't remember.
Compatibility or?
Yeah. Stefan did a talk about CRD, kept about the schema. Was that mutable fields, the different kinds of mutability?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So following with the same topic, there is 3 KubeCons scheduled for this year. Amsterdam is the first one. I think calls for paper is closed, but as a SIG, we still have the opportunity to sign up for intro and deep dive. I was talking to David. It looks like David is going to be doing a deep dive. We still have not clear if anybody wants to do the intro to SIG API Machinery. So if somebody on this call is interested, ping me. We can pair you up with somebody else. You don't have to do all the work. I think it's good to have always an introductory session.
Yeah, the deep dive in where was it? The last one was super well attended. So that's like a real that's like a real talk.
Yes.
There were like 300 or 400 people in the room,
and it was really good. I recommend watching it. The link is there.
Are you sure that we can apply for 2 sessions?
Yes.
This is Maciej. From what I was reading the email, my understanding was that SIGs are only given 1 spot. Only the projects are given 2 spots in the schedule, or can apply for that.
Yeah, we definitely got both intro and deep dive last time. Often we just do a deep dive.
No. I'm aware how it works in the past because I've been doing something similar for the 6 CLI. What I'm saying is for KubeCon Amsterdam.
I don't know. Thank you for the heads up.
Yeah, I'll double check. the email I got.
Double check the email. I think for the 6, it is only one session, and it is a 35 one session. Only projects are given 2 possible sessions.
Well, if that's the case, that solves our problem because we already have the deep dive covered. With an intro.
I'm willing to open that up to negotiation. I guess you and Daniel and I can talk about topics and figure out what we think would be most helpful. But we will plan to have something in Europe.
Yeah, it does look like my check is right, and we can only have one of them.
Okay.
Magic for reading the emails better than me.
Yeah, I just read the 2 sessions and finished, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, you got to read all the way to the end of the sentence.
I spent a decent amount of time on that email trying to digest what the author actually meant, whether it's because it wasn't clearly obvious whether they're talking about Cube 6 or the CNCF 6, because you can have both. And I think that I even went up to the point that I opened the form, and when I picked the SIG, because there's no distinction between Cube and CNC and SIG, it allowed me to only sign up for one.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we do have the apply working group, so we can submit a first session on behalf of that, apparently. So
Okay.
We can think about that.
And I'm sure there is a lot of people, at least that I know here at Google, waiting for a response on the CFP. So we'll see. Good. So let's go to something more solid. Antoine, do you want to talk about the next one?
Yeah, I don't have much to say, so it's not going to be.
Come closer, please.
I don't have much to say. It's not going to be very solid. We realized when we started discussing about features being better for too long that Dryrun and diff were better for quite some time now. So we've decided to make it GA in 1.18. Diff heavily depends on Dryrun. It's mostly a 6 CLI feature, but I thought I would mention it. And Dryrun, we're mostly done. We don't have a lot of changes to do. It's mostly in kubectl. We're changing the way the Dryrun flag is going to be used. And we're documenting the features, trying to make sure everything's documented properly. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Since you're here, we might as well talk about server-side apply, which we're trying to go to like a second beta.
Oh yeah, that's true. So we're doing a beta 2, which is not an official thing, but still, it's good to mention it.
Yeah, we're not making API changes that or at least we don't think we are at the moment. So.
Okay. So I remember last we had talked about it, there was consideration of a custom compression algorithm.
Yeah, we think we can do it without invoking that. So we're in the process of turning it on now.
Okay.
We turned it on halfway and got a flake, which we're fixing, then we'll turn it on halfway again.
Yeah.
And then I remember Antoine, I think it was Antoine last year, was trying to change a CLI flag. Was that Antoine or was that somebody else?
It's probably Antoine.
I do that sometimes. Which flag?
It was the behavior for Cube control apply, and like today you can say I want it against the server or not.
Yeah, so we're not planning on changing that now.
Okay.
We want the feature to work well before we consider changing the default.
Okay, that's fine.
And then we don't know how we're going to change the default, so we need to think about that.
Because I remember that was my comment on the enhancement. It was how do you get to where you want to be in the end and not stuck halfway?
Yeah, we need to think about that.
What is the scope of beta 2?
So right now we only track the fields for objects that have been applied before, and we're trying to track fields for every single object.
Yeah, we want to make it universal.
Yeah,
it's a prerequisite to implement our other like general schema checking things like immutable fields or unions or whatever. So we want that on everywhere. And that also gets us over the main hump, which is performance. So if we get it on everywhere, then it's just the long tail of small bugs before we can call it GA.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Antoine.
Yeah, if you want to work on that or help or follow along, chat up Antoine in Slack.
Yeah, we would love that because I'm sure you have a lot of experience optimizing the critical loop, so that'd be super useful.
Also, working group apply gets together every 2 weeks.
Yes.
Tuesday mornings, 9:30 PST.
Yes.
There is quite of a a large community of people already working on all these features. There is work for everybody: test, documentation, coding, performance testing. So there is a lot.
Yep.
Cool. Next one, David Ashpole is here. So let me open this cap. David.
Do you mind if I share my screen, actually?
Oh, please. I need to stop sharing, right?
Yeah. I'll try and be quick, but I think this should help. So, hi everyone, my name is David Ashpole. I hail from SIG Node, and I've been playing around with tracing for a year or so now and gave a talk at KubeCon if you'd like to see a more fully fleshed out version of this. But I just want to walk through what I'm doing and what changes would be required for this from SIG API Machinery. So actually first, I'll just start out with a super quick demo. The basic idea is that from the API or from the API server's perspective, I want to be able to get traces for requests that are sent to it. So
when you say requests, what do you mean?
I mean REST calls to the API server. So for example, create, update, delete, requests sent for a particular object.
Okay.
So if I were to, whoops. I forgot the important part, which is specify that I want it to be traced. And this, the CLI I'll talk to SIG CLI for, so that might change. But the basic idea is that I should be able to send something to the API server and then see the amount of time it spent in the API server and the amount of time it was waiting on etcd. And possibly also, if etcd were to implement tracing, then we would also be able to see the spans from etcd as well. But basically all this is doing is, if I hop back to my slides, is we've added a plugin to the HTTP handler for the API server and a plugin to the, and a dial option to the etcd gRPC client. And each time a request passes through those, we get some trace from it. And then,
and where does the trace go?
Oh, so I've sent this to Zipkin. This is using the Open Telemetry framework.
So what was the request path that got it there? Did API server push it there?
So
or?
API server pushes it to the Open Telemetry agent, which basically can be configured to point to one of a number of different backends. So the Open Telemetry project is basically trying to make it so that you can write tracing in your code once, send it to a generic collector, and then from there, send it to one of a variety of backends. Okay. Yeah, so this isn't vendor specific. And I picked Zipkin to show that it isn't. And then part of the tracing kept is that we want to be able to not just do this for simple things like create a config map, but also be able to allow controllers to add traces. So if I were to create a deployment with 5 pods, let's see if this works. I haven't tested this in a few months. Last run at KubeCon. Okay. So if we were to create a deployment, we can see the request coming into the API server, the etcd transaction for the deployment creation. We can see the deployment controller creating the replica set and the requests to do that. And then we can even see the scheduler scheduling the pod, the kubelet doing its thing, and sending requests to the container runtime. So these are all coming to the CRI.
In order to do that, did you end up having to annotate a pod in some way? I mean, I don't see another way to pass communication between a kubeAPI server and a kubelet or anything like that.
You're exactly right. So the context, or the span context, which is how OpenTelemetry passes context around, is stored in an annotation. And we're able to do all of this without adding any extra requests. So it just sort of rides along with a given state that's set initially.
But the controller has to propagate that from
yes, so all the controllers needed to be modified in order to propagate context correctly. For example, when the deployment controller creates replica sets, it needs to take the context from the deployment object and then stick it in the replica set when it creates it. Maybe this. Okay, so cool, fun. This is one change that involves API machinery, and then the second change, which may be more difficult, we'll see, is that to make this convenient to do, it would be nice to add context to the client Go interfaces. That way, we can still use them, and we can pass context that's then used for the call to the API.
Okay, so my thoughts on it. Obviously, that's super cool to have all that list. It's hard to argue against it, but I'm going to try anyway.
Okay, great.
Actually, I think the client Go context change is obviously correct and would help us with lots of things. So I don't have any arguments whatsoever with that. I'm a little more nervous about making API server push things, and my other concern is, I'd like to know more detail about how that works.
Okay. Some detail around how many requests we're talking about pushing, right? Like in aggregate, if we gathered them up and pushed them every once in a while, I don't think I'd have much stress over it.
Yeah, I'm also worried about like what's the network path and how to, like, if you're in some weird environment, like where's the tracing collector going to live? Like, what is it going to be?
How are we going to run that?
Does that be co-located with API server, or can it be in the cluster, or is it external service, or you don't have to answer that right now.
Okay.
That's something I want to see. The other thing, just from a theoretical standpoint, like, what do you do if multiple controllers are acting on an object, right? Like out of band.
That's why they had the annotation on it. I would suspect it has multiple correlation spheres, so that you'd be able to go in and say, like, I want this subset. I assume I could get a trace just for that pod, not for the deployment as a whole, right?
Like suppose I wanted to track the effects an HPA configuration has on a system, and I want to separately track the effects that creating a deployment has.
Yeah.
Like, so, last we talked, I think one of them clobbered the other,
yes,
and like
they
you only
still
saw one.
Yep.
So I like, if you add everything, then eventually you're going to touch every object in the cluster, which doesn't seem sustainable. But if you don't, then you have this condition where you see the trace, and you only see, like, somebody wins and the other person sees an incomplete result.
Right. And then the only mitigation we really have is to link the first one to the second, so that you can see the stuff that was definitely associated with your change, and then be able to see everything that happened afterward as a result of the next change. But yeah, once an object is updated, you don't really, or the controllers don't, I think, know which fields were changed by. We wouldn't want to track it in that way, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't know. Something that I think would be both easy and unobjectionable is just report our current, because we actually already trace this information and report it in logs.
Yep.
Just add that to a header, and the response might be useful.
Well, but this is a different person, right? Well, I assume it's a different person, right? I'm assuming I would not open up open tracing to my average user, and that instead this would be either user gets a limited view of it, he can see his own, or more likely someone says such and such isn't working right, and an admin tries to figure that out.
Yeah, that's a good question. How do you ensure that this doesn't expose like information about the cluster to people without permission, like the names of secrets, for example?
It's a good question.
Hey, this is Jordan. I had a couple questions also. I'm not super familiar with how like the span IDs or trace IDs are generated, but like would this allow me to make a request and claim to be using a different span ID or trace ID and like make it appear as if something was working really well or really poorly when it wasn't actually?
It sounds like definitionally, yes. Like if the controller manager pollinates spans
right,
accidentally or intentionally, like you could add a bunch of strange things to the trace.
Yeah.
You could certainly. So if you're trying to add to a trace, you're saying?
No, if you're trying to dodge detection, like as just a simple example.
So you would have to, in order to get it to attach, because the trace makes a tree of parents. Not sure what happens if you take the trace ID and try and add to it without adding to some tree. I'm not.
Can I, if I have a trace ID, can I not just replay it? Like just keep using it in requests? What happens?
Like especially if we're persisting it on objects, at that point it's visible and mutable and copyable.
Yep.
And so like I look at this and I'm like, oh, this is a great demo. And as soon as you have something this powerful that like is so immediately useful, people start building important things on top of it. And so asking like how easily spoofed or manipulated or like before we build important things on top would be great.
We probably would have had people build a garbage collection on it.
I agree with Daniel. The context change I think is non-controversial
except in like how we actually go
goal.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, so I think that would unblock a lot of people. Be the first step towards this, and also things like priority and fairness, and making sure we clean up back-end stuff when the front end times out, and all kinds of things. So I'd really like to see that happen. I know Mike Denise is on the call as well and was looking at that recently.
Yeah, this would be good for priority and fairness because we need to thread especially folks in our case need to be as important as the thing that they're like. If they make a callback into API server, they need to be at least as important as the thing that they're calling on behalf of.
Yeah. So to answer your earlier question, now that I've digested it, so yeah, anyone that can read the pod object could then claim to have done some action on behalf of it.
And reappropriate things that he had done, I assume, right? Like, so if I see a pod and I've created a bunch of other, I don't know, pods or deployments or something, I could go and reassign their IDs that got billed to somebody else.
If you were building,
billing
on top of
trace data, yeah.
Well, but like, or attribution, maybe would be more accurate. Like, destroy the data.
But that's not an audit log, right? That's not meant to be an audit log.
What you end up doing is you would end up. So I think I've accidentally done this many times, but if you export multiple trees under the same trace ID, most backends will just pick one and display it. So if you copied a span context from one object to another, and then controllers did things on both of them and exported spans, then you would end up just seeing one tree or another, and it would pick one of them.
Hopefully people would not be using this to do billing. I think that would be
attribution as opposed to billing. Like, yeah, I can see myself looking at it and saying, how much of the budget are you using? And finding a value for it.
So I can give a little bit of context on how this should be used. It obviously can be abused if you don't build things well, but generally people trace a small percentage of requests and try to trace ones that are problematic or interesting in some way. So you wouldn't, for example, have this tracing everything all the time. You would want to trace 1%, 1/4%, or even just, as I've implemented here, explicitly specified requests where you want to know very detailed view of what happened.
So terminology quibble, like I wouldn't call this request tracing. This is like object lifecycle tracing.
Yes, it is.
So the first thing you showed was just a config map.
It was request tracing.
That was a request. Yeah,
right.
When it's just showing you API server goes to etcd in the back, like that's a request. And if there were web, it should show up in there too. That's a request. But the other thing where there's the value propagated through annotations, like that is not request tracing.
It's not request tracing. No.
Would this also be intended to be used as tracing inside the API server? So tracing, for example, server-side apply or other paths, or is it just aimed for?
It could.
It is entirely up to you guys.
Yeah.
Okay. The bare minimum is to say, when did it get to you? And when did the request leave to go to someone else, so that someone can figure out if a problem or where a problem is. But
yeah, if we had this, I think at a minimum, we would track the things that could possibly be slow. So
yeah, we would separate admission from etcd storage.
Yeah, there's admission, probably calling out webhooks separately.
Right. Each time there's a request boundary.
Yeah.
Whether it's to a webhook or to etcd or audit, like request boundaries make sense.
We'd also probably, once priority and fairness is in, which I think is the next agenda item, once priority and fairness is in, we would want to separately count time you spend waiting for service from time that it takes to surface the request. Because we're going to in-queue requests with that.
Do we want to spend a couple minutes talking about the mechanics of the context change? I think that would unblock a lot, and it would be great to get that in early in 118 if we're going to do it.
Yeah.
There were several ideas before. What actually? How about we just ask? What was your idea?
My idea? My idea was, I admit this is probably the worst idea you'll hear, but my idea was just to make the change in our code base, and then as people update their dependencies, they can make their change.
That is the only approach that both Jordan and I agree to, and we're arguing over how disruptive it is.
Okay.
What about duplicating the surface area so that you can be backwards compatible?
I mean, people can continue to use a prior version of the client library.
Yeah, so adding methods to an interface is not actually backwards compatible. So
there's also
if we're looking to be compatible, there's actually no way to do it without like introducing a parallel package.
Yeah, you'd have to duplicate.
And making the existing package that people are currently using be the old legacy bad way forever.
Yeah, you'd have to duplicate the interface from the very root of the interface tree, since we do have an interface tree here. That's known. Yeah. Yeah, I think we would just modify the client to accept the context in all of its calls as the first argument.
Are we ready to do it? I'm ready to be happy with that.
I actually don't know why it didn't happen last release. Like, I thought we all agreed that that was okay.
Yeah, I think it's fine. The versioning stuff around the Go module stuff improved a lot in 117, so it makes it way easier for people to grab a coherent set of dependencies and see that, oh yeah, I'm using all 117 versions, I'm using all 116 versions. So, and the feedback we've gotten on that has been really good, actually. People updating the 117 said it was much easier, it was much more coherent to understand like what version they were using and make sure they had the right versions. So, and we are explicitly tagging things as v0 dot whatever, which accurately reflects what our posture on these libraries has been, which is use a matching set of versions across these components. and they can change from release to release.
Yeah. In terms of actually getting this change merged, it might make sense to have parallel functions like just for the period of time during which we're modifying all the code so that we don't have to change everything in one single PR.
No, Mike has a tool.
It
changes everything in one single PR. It's automated. It's awesome.
I have automated it. Yeah, I have a branch queued up. It built probably in December. But yeah, I have a short little hacky tool that fixes almost everything except for maybe.
I'm worried more about reviewing the change than I am about making the change. So
you don't have to review the change, you just have to review the tool.
Yeah, that sounds like something people on this call would do.
I know like Google's internal like automated source code change tool will do it in batches. I think this might be big enough that might be necessary, which means that you have to keep the code compiling and working in intermediate stages.
If I were to do it, I would probably do it per method. So I would, if there's a particular method that's highly used, like replica set.read or something, then
I think if I were doing this, I would add first I'd do a global rename of the existing methods to like temporary name. So
Okay.
and like that's easy to review because you can just count the changes and make sure that they're fine, even though it's a global change, right?
Okay.
Then I'd add the new methods that fit the context, and then I would, in a series of changes, roll it out everywhere. Methods, and that would all need to be done before we cut the next release.
So Daniel, you have just channeled David. So now we have a triangle. So now we need a Lava Eads 2K GitHub account. David proposed actually snapshotting the existing package tree and making a copy of it and calling it, deprecated client set or legacy client set, and then a single rename of all uses to legacy client set. And then
doing what I proposed, but triggering
doing what you proposed, but actually shipping it for a release, so that everyone who wants to upgrade can make the same package rename when they bump to 118 dependencies, and then heal their code base or transition their code base to the new package in stages.
Right. Like you look at it, we build on top, we have the same issue, right? We've got, 50, 60, 70 repos and thousands of usages. And
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Other
people, like
this group, yeah.
So allowing consumers to do the same stage, bump, rename, and then transition. I'm warming to the idea as long as it literally is a copy, like a copy. There's no additional generation. We document the package as this is to aid in transitioning to context-specific methods. And
I guess the nice thing is that this duplicate could just add a context.todo and call the new interface, right?
I wasn't even going to do anything that fancy. I mean, I would just do a straight copy. I think we still somewhere have the code that freezes entire directory trees. So I would do a straight copy, freeze the code for the entire directory tree, bulk rename, and then not even wire generation to it. Right? Because it's just there to die. It's there because it makes it easier for us to do a very fast, non-conflicty merge across the whole code base for changing the imports, and then take bunches to do a mechanical update however we need to add the context. And I think I'd want to do the exact same thing downstream as well. And I doubt I'm the only one.
The only issue I can think of with that is if we have to do a security fix. We'll have to do it even if we frozen the directory.
Yeah, I can't actually think of the last time the generated client set was involved in our security.
I don't think we've had a security fix in Client Go yet.
No, that's not true. Well, you mean, I think we've had dependencies.
Yeah, API Machinery has.
API Machinery definitely, and API Server, but Client Go, I don't.
Not since we split out client Go. I think we had path traversal things like around 1011 that were
Those were all
what would now be client Go, but
yeah. Okay, so it sounds like we've reached the position that we should probably have one release that supports both interfaces.
Depending on what you mean by support, makes the old one available under an alternate legacy package.
We want to permit people to do the transition piecemeal rather than require that they change their entire code base at the same time.
Yeah, so it's important to note that there are two issues that have been raised. One is a consumer that is depending on something like controller runtime and depending on Kubernetes libraries. And this would not help that consumer because controller runtime, they don't control the code for that, right? So until controller runtime updates to use the context-specific methods, consumers of controller runtime are stuck on whatever version of Kube controller runtime supports. What this does help is someone who controls their entire code base and just needs to stage out the updates.
Yeah. So
Ollie's sitting in the room right there, right?
This is not, in fact, a practical problem for controller runtime because we do not use any of the generated clients in our public interface, and I think we only use the generated clients in our test suite.
You don't use the generated clients, but you do use API Machinery, so you are frozen to a specific version of Kubernetes.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I see what you're saying there.
Right. So moving the existing client Go interfaces to a legacy package would not help someone who wanted to update to latest Kubernetes, but still remain compatible with controller runtime against an older version of Kubernetes.
Yeah, to actually make it useful that way, we have to make both use the same types somehow and or provide a way to convert between.
I mean, yeah, at that point you get into like actual Go compatibility, release to release, or renaming your modules to different major versions.
Which is, it's very difficult in Client Go right now to refer to alternative versions of Client Go.
Yeah, you sometimes get lucky and one happens to be forwards compatible in the ways that you need it to be. So like sometimes people will be able to use newer versions of Client Go and API Machinery with older versions of controller runtime, but it's kind of a like cross your fingers.
Luck-driven development is not a recommended methodology. Yeah. All right. I'm in favor of the rename or the copy of the package, the snapshot of the current package to a legacy package, and then heal the add context and heal the Kube code base, maybe with Mike's generated change. If we can get that all in at once, that'd be great. If we run into conflicts, we might need to stage it.
Yeah, it would probably be a relatively small diff to add create context or context suffixes to each method and then do the tree in batches of subtrees. But I don't know, it might be nice to do it all at once as well if it's not overwhelming.
I think the community pull request that was open a long time ago that proposed this talked about threading context to the client Go, like the create, delete, list watch, update, patch, whatever methods, and also to informers. I am much less certain about the meaning of context being passed to an informer lister watcher or an informer method because that spans multiple requests. So I think we should start with just the client interfaces and talk about the informer ones separately.
Would have been a mistake. I agree that doesn't make much sense. That's a good thing to specify though in the CAP.
Yeah, I'd have to think about that. Long-running threads that span multiple requests should probably use their own context.
I haven't read the Go doc in a long time. Are we allowed to save these? Should we save them?
No.
Context is associated with a single word, generally.
A single what?
Request.
Okay.
or a single, I guess, operation. Like it
I was
doesn't
gonna
have
say, because like yeah, you think about like in
Give me a deadline, because they have a deadline or a timeout. And a deadline or a timeout or cancellation, you could maybe make the case that you could use cancel to like tell an informer to stop, but deadline doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I would expect the informers or whatever to construct a new context every time they perform like a list or a watch operation, I guess.
Yeah.
I think there is a note in the code doc that you shouldn't store context.
Correct.
So
yeah.
Okay. Then yeah, I don't see why you'd put it on informer.
Okay. I think if you look back at the notes from the last time we talked about it, I had the action item to copy the community proposal to a CAP. I can still do that. It will not be this week. If someone wants to jump on it and summarize the notes and get that into CAP form, I would not object. Otherwise, I will get to it probably next week. Awesome. Hearing none, I will put it on my list for next week.
Okay, I tried to summarize the decisions we made in the notes. I guess you're projecting it now. Okay, yeah, okay.
I got one question for the tracing itself. Did you look at options without storing the trace ID or span ID on the object? Like inside API server, you could trace everything that goes out from the server, like admission. I'm not sure about the whole watch stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be a first small step. I don't know.
So yeah, we could definitely do that. That essentially amounts to the same set of changes I'm proposing to you here, which is trace stuff in the API server and add the client Go. Whether or not we do the insert it in an annotation and then use that to allow controllers to propagate context between it is, if we feel, for example, that it doesn't handle concurrent updates well enough, we can certainly, at least for the alpha, start with just tracing requests to and from the API server. But yeah, that's definitely an option.
Okay, we still got a few items left, so we should probably move on.
Yep. Thank you for the demo. You're very welcome.
Yeah, okay.
That's fun.
Quick update on priority and fairness. I sent an email to the SIG list to sort of say where we are. I'd like to have a working alpha in 1.18. We're working on getting the last couple PRs in. Something like after we've got the basic functionality in, the thing that I think we need to think about is observability. How do we help people understand, if they've configured this right, and or is this, as a developer, I sent a request and it took longer than expected. Why is that? Is it because I matched to the wrong priority level, or is it because somebody else is hogging the cluster or something like that? So I have some ideas on how we can make that more visible, but we're still working to get the basic functionality merged. So
thank you.
Yeah, basically if you have ideas on how to improve the visibility of the system, now's a good time to mention them. You can respond to the email or chat in Slack or something.
Good. Thank you, Daniel. Martin, are you?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So again, Happy New Year, and I'm just here just to bump you again for this CAP for the master service to be of type of external name. I really hope to get at least the CAP implementable for 1.18, because the code changes which are related. I mean, the most concerning part will be the API server controller, but everything in the Kubernetes has already been done. I mean, I even have a PR open from a couple of months ago, so it's only updates there. So just looking for feedback on the entire cap, and yeah.
I have this cap open in a tab, and I've had it open in a tab for months, and I feel super guilty about it.
Yeah.
I just haven't gotten to it yet. David, have you read this cap?
This was presented at the beginning of 117, wasn't it?
Yeah, this is.
Yes.
Yeah. This is.
I'm a little bit guilty because I didn't want to be too pushy, but yeah.
No, I haven't looked at it. I remember it, and now I feel bad. If I didn't remember it, I wouldn't feel bad.
Clearly, the problem is having a good memory. Clearly,
I remember looking at this, and I didn't understand the repercussions.
Okay, so pretty much the two changes that needs to happen is first in the API server, the controller for the endpoints reconciler needs to be changed, or let's say modified in order to.
No, I mean I remember like mechanically there were a couple things that needed to be changed. I didn't know offhand when I looked at it what that would mean for consumers and all.
I mean nothing unless they explicitly enable it. I mean the cluster maintainers or the cluster operators which are creating the cluster, there won't be any change.
Right. So the question is, if someone does enable it in a cluster, what does that mean for the things running on the cluster, especially inside pods? Like, how does that change?
Oh yes.
What does that change for things inside pods?
I mean, because currently we don't have any updates on. I mean, none of the clients are actually watching for this change. Every single controller or pod which is listening, which is talking to the API server, probably needs to be restarted. I mean, it's the same with when you roll out on new certificates, pretty much.
So just sweeping through, it looks like this would mean that the address that's projected into pods to speak to the API server would become a DNS name instead of an IP address?
Yes, exactly. Okay,
so that's a pretty visible change. I know we've talked about this in a few different contexts, and whether or not that is going to break things running inside pods.
Yeah, I think the reason why this has evaded attention is because it's actually really hard to reason about the effect that would have, and and be confident in the results of abstract reasoning.
I mean, so far I've looked into all of the dynamic clients, all the clients like the Python client, the client Go. In all those cases, they're pretty much parsing the environment variable for the Kubernetes hostname, and they are simply putting it as the server address and appending HTTPS in front of it, and then just saying it's on port 443. And all the clients are doing this thing. Unless you have specific like a test. And in the cluster, and the cluster has been created or has been modified with this change, then I don't think there is any problem with it. I have done it manually. I have tested with a lot of different controllers and everything on a patched Kubernetes cluster, and everything was running without any problems so far.
Yeah, I think it's a large enough change that we need additional people to go through the reasoning process that you just described.
I know I'm trying to find a conversation that Tim Hawken was part of. It was around this exact issue, like what would need to happen if we were going to start injecting DNS names in place of this or in addition to this. And I'll see if I can track that down and add a link to that conversation. And maybe I think probably SIG Network could be copied into this. They might have an idea of interesting network topologies that this would work well with or not work well with.
Okay. I think that would help alleviate some of my, like I remember previously looking at this and going, I don't know what this would do.
Yeah. But we definitely owe it to Martin to review this. It's been in our queues for a really long time.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll add the SIG networking. I'll probably add team. And do you have any more suggestions? Who is more active with the reviews on that site at least?
Oh, Tim's pretty active.
Okay. Tim Hawken, and we need. Well, Tim could review it if he has.
Yeah.
But
or he would know someone, I would expect.
Yeah, definitely one of David or I needs to actually read this.
For the impact to the master stuff, at least, yeah.
So I don't know. We can do rock paper scissors offline.
That's probably my turn. I found the tab. I actually found the tab.
Yeah, I know. I found it last time. I was triaging the tabs that I have open and felt pretty bad about it, but didn't actually look at it.
David, did you just volunteer or?
I did, but I am gonna. I can reach out to Tim as well. I guess I can reach out to Tim separately if Martin isn't sure. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I will also add. I'll update the cap and then I'll add him as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Martin. And we're almost out of time. Last topic is just a reminder, anybody that is new or forgot, we run twice a week back triages. They are public meetings. A lot of the people that is here today will go there. We go through everything that was submitted as a pull request or opened as an issue from the last meeting. So sometimes we get a lot, sometimes don't, but you know, it's a very important way of keeping track of what's going on through our SIG and the code that is going in. So yeah, come join us. We don't bite. Yeah, and I think that's all.
I have a quick question for David while he's metaphorically in the room. Did you get anywhere with the like API Machinery base cap that you had proposed?
Yeah, to be able to start pulling out the pieces so that you'd be able to build a client that didn't rely on API Machinery?
Yeah, that didn't rely on API Machinery and Client Go and that stuff.
I'm embarrassed to say that no, I did not. But
Okay.
you know what? You know what? This is number 2. I will go ahead and write myself an email reminder.
That's totally fine. I just wanted to make sure I hadn't missed anything.
Nope. I'm sorry.
Cool.
No apology is necessary. We're all busy.
Yeah, totally.
Blame free. Okay.
Okay, and I think that's it. Thank you, everybody. Today. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.